Captain Lena Walker, a respected police officer devoted to her community, suddenly faces a life-changing accusation of misconduct, an accusation crafted by someone she thought was a trusted colleague. As her career and reputation spiral, Lena finds herself fighting a hidden enemy and unraveling a web of lies, all to reclaim her life and clear her name. Will she uncover the truth in time, or will she lose everything she's worked for? Join us for this powerful story of resilience and justice. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. And let us know in the comments, how would you react if someone tried to take everything you'd worked to build? Now let's begin Lena's journey. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over Willowbrook, a neighborhood that Captain Lena Walker knew like the back of her hand. She slowed her patrol car as she cruised down the familiar streets, her gaze sweeping over the scene like a quiet guardian. Children played in front yards, their laughter carrying on the soft breeze, while a few elderly residents sat on their porches, waving as she passed. This was the Willowbrook she loved, vibrant, tightly knit, and filled with people who looked out for one another. To Lena, Willowbrook was more than just another stop on her patrol route. She had worked here for over 15 years, watching the seasons change and witnessing the people grow. There were families she'd seen raise children from infancy to adolescence, local businesses she'd visited regularly, and the quiet stories of resilience and struggle that marked every corner. She often thought of Willowbrook as more than her professional responsibility. It was part of her identity. She felt an unspoken bond with its people, an unyielding duty to protect them not just as a police officer, but as a neighbor. Spotting a crooked fence along a narrow yard, Lena pulled over and got out of the car, adjusting her uniform as she approached the small, quaint house. Mrs. Anderson, a sweet, talkative woman in her 70s, was crouched over a row of wilting flowers, pulling weeds with a kind of gentle persistence. "Captain Walker, you're just in time." Mrs. Anderson's face lit up as she looked up, shading her eyes from the sun. She gave Lena an enthusiastic wave. "This fence has seen better days, let me tell you." Lena chuckled, setting her hands on her hips as she surveyed the tilted wooden slats. "I can see that, Mrs. Anderson. Let me give you a hand with it." Together, they straightened the old fence, the conversation flowing as naturally as the breeze. Mrs. Anderson regaled Lena with tales of her garden's past glory and updates on neighborhood news. When they finished, she gave Lena's arm a grateful squeeze. "Don't know what we'd do without you around here, Lena," she said, her eyes warm. "You're more than just a cop to us." "Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I'm lucky to know you all." Lena felt a genuine smile spreading across her face. It was moments like these that reinforced her dedication to the job, a reminder of the quiet strength of community and the value of connection. After saying goodbye to Mrs. Anderson, Lena continued on her patrol, her heart light with the sense of purpose that always accompanied her here. As she neared the precinct, she let her thoughts wander to her plans for the neighborhood outreach event she was organizing, hoping to foster trust between Willowbrook's residents and the police department. Back at the precinct, the hum of activity was a stark contrast to the calm she'd just left behind. The station buzzed with the usual clatter of phones ringing, officers rushing past, and the background murmur of conversations blending together. Detective Caleb Turner, Lena's longtime partner and closest confidant, leaned against her office doorway with a smile as she entered. Caleb was a calm presence in the often chaotic world of law enforcement, a friend she trusted implicitly. He was tall and athletic, with an easy smile and eyes that could spot trouble from a mile away, a skill honed from years in the field. "Been out saving the neighborhood again, Captain," he teased, crossing his arms. Lena laughed, shrugging off her jacket. "Just keep an eye on things. It's been a quiet day." Caleb nodded, stepping inside and handing her a stack of reports. "Well, maybe quiet out there, but we got a bit of a storm brewing in here. You heard about the new guy? Officer Ryan Hale?" "Hale?" Lena repeated, flipping through the papers distractedly. She'd seen his name on the roster recently, but hadn't yet met him. "Transferred from the suburbs, right?" "That's the one." Caleb's voice held an edge she hadn't heard before. "He's been talking a lot about cleaning up the neighborhood. Seems to think Willowbrook is one big problem area that just needs a firmer hand. Lena frowned, setting the papers down. She had heard that kind of talk before. Words coated with assumptions and biases that weren't always easy to shake. Sounds like he hasn't spent much time here yet. Caleb's expression turned serious. I've seen guys like him before, Lena. All they see are statistics and reports. They come in with rigid ideas and think they can impose order without understanding the people. Lena leaned back, her gaze thoughtful. Well, I'll keep an eye out. Willowbrook isn't just a problem area to me. It's a community, and it deserves respect. Just then, a knock sounded on her office door. Lena looked up to see a young man standing in the doorway. Tall, fit, and impeccably groomed, with a square jaw and a set expression that bordered on arrogance. Captain Walker? His voice was polite, but carried a certain sharpness. I'm Officer Ryan Hale. I just wanted to introduce myself. Lena stood, extending her hand with a smile. Good to meet you, Officer Hale. I've heard you're new to Willowbrook. Settling in all right? Hale shook her hand firmly, though his expression remained unreadable. I'm settling in just fine, Captain. This place is different from my last assignment. I think we have some improvements we can make here. Lena raised an eyebrow. Improvements? Yes, ma'am, he said, his tone even but his gaze assessing. I believe in maintaining a firm approach to discipline. From what I've seen, Willowbrook could use more structured oversight, perhaps some new policies to tighten things up. Lena felt a chill. His words were courteous enough, but she caught the undertone of control, a readiness to impose order without understanding the nuances of the neighborhood. His mention of oversight felt more like an imposition of authority than a desire to serve. Willowbrook's a unique place, Officer Hale, she replied carefully, choosing her words. It takes time to get to know the people, to understand the challenges here. Firm policies can be helpful, but trust goes a long way too. Hale's expression didn't change, but his grip on his belt tightened. With all due respect, Captain, I believe our duty is to enforce the law. Trust is important, but sometimes control is necessary. Lena gave him a measured nod, her mind racing with questions. Well, I'm sure you'll get to know the neighborhood soon enough. It's not all about what's on paper, Officer Hale. There's more to Willowbrook than meets the eye. Hale nodded, but offered nothing more before turning on his heel and walking away. Caleb, who had been listening quietly, watched him leave with narrowed eyes. Looks like he's got some pretty strong opinions already, Caleb muttered. Lena's gaze lingered on the doorway, where Hale had just left. Yes, and something tells me he's not in a hurry to change them. As she watched him go, an uneasy feeling settled over her. Officer Hale's views didn't bode well for the way she ran things in Willowbrook. He was sharp, driven, and clearly ready to make his mark, but his approach felt cold and methodical, qualities that rarely meshed well with community policing. But Lena pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that it was too early to judge. Still, her instincts were seldom wrong. A week passed, but Lena couldn't shake the sense of unease that had lingered since her first encounter with Officer Hale. His comments about Willowbrook, the way he'd spoken about control and discipline, it all hinted at a mindset she'd seen before, one that valued rigid enforcement over the kind of compassionate policing she believed in. She wanted to chalk it up to new job jitters, but her instincts, honed over years on the force, warned her that this was different. Lena kept her interactions with Hale brief, watching as he familiarized himself with Willowbrook on his own terms. She noticed the way he observed people, his posture tense, his gaze cold and analytical. He wasn't just learning the beat. He was studying the neighborhood as though it were a problem to solve, not a community to serve. It was late one afternoon when Hale's attitude finally came to a head. Lena had just finished up some paperwork when she received a call from Willowbrook Market, a neighborhood convenience store she frequented. Kevin Shaw, the store's owner, had reported an attempted theft and requested police assistance. Lena grabbed her jacket and headed out, radioing that she was en route. She felt the familiar rush of focus as she drove, though she knew this wasn't likely to be a serious incident. Kevin often called her with small concerns, everything from suspicious behavior outside his store to kids roughhousing a bit too close to the windows. When she arrived at Willowbrook Market, she spotted Kevin pacing outside, looking worried. He waved as she approached. "Captain Walker, thank you for coming," he said, wringing his hands. "I thought it might have been more serious, but I couldn't be sure." "It's all right, Kevin," Lena replied with a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing by calling. Let's take a look." She entered the store, assessing the familiar aisles stocked with colorful snacks and household items. There was no sign of a disturbance, just a few customers browsing the shelves and the usual hum of the store's cooling units. As Lena spoke to Kevin about what he'd seen, she heard the store's bell jingle as someone else entered. Turning, she saw Officer Hale, his expression serious as he scanned the store. His eyes flicked briefly to her, then back to the shelves. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he seemed almost suspicious. "Captain Walker," he said coolly, coming up beside her. "I got a call from dispatch. Thought I'd come check things out." Lena's brow furrowed, but she nodded politely. "I appreciate it, Officer Hale, but it seems like a minor misunderstanding. Kevin says he saw someone lingering near the back, but didn't notice anything unusual after that." Hale's gaze shifted back to the aisles, where a young mother and her child were browsing near the refrigerated section. His posture was stiff, eyes narrowed, as if every corner of the store might hide something sinister. "Just doing my due diligence," he replied, a hint of challenge in his tone. He moved past her, starting down one of the aisles, his movements methodical and deliberate. Lena bit back a sigh, sensing this was about more than due diligence. Hale's rigid stance and watchful demeanor suggested he saw a threat here, despite the clear evidence to the contrary. Her initial impression of his approach felt increasingly justified, and she wondered how he would handle interactions like this without alienating people. When he circled back, Hale's eyes landed on her with a glint of something she couldn't quite place. "You might want to keep a closer eye on places like this, Captain. There's a lot that goes unnoticed if you're not looking carefully." Lena's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "I know this community, Officer Hale. Willowbrook Market has been here for years, and Kevin's one of the most diligent store owners in the neighborhood. We handle situations with respect and context here." Hale's face betrayed nothing, but his silence was loud enough. Without another word, he left the store, leaving Lena with a growing sense of dread. She thanked Kevin, who looked slightly unnerved, and told him to call if he needed anything further. As she walked back to her car, she realized that Hale's approach was more than just heavy-handed. It was personal. Days passed, and though Lena focused on her work as usual, she couldn't shake the sense that Hale's presence was casting a long shadow over Willowbrook. It was subtle at first, a few offhand remarks from her colleagues about keeping things in line, or conversations quieting when she entered a room. The rumors, she suspected, were already beginning to spread. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Lena stopped by Willowbrook Market again to grab a snack before her shift ended. The familiar chime of the bell welcomed her as she stepped inside. Kevin greeted her with a warm smile, nodding as she picked up a bottle of water and a granola bar. "Good to see you, Captain Walker," he said, giving her a friendly wave. "Good to see you too, Kevin," she replied, heading toward the counter. As she approached, she noticed a figure standing near the back of the store, Officer Hale. He hadn't been there when she'd entered, and his sudden appearance felt calculated, like he'd been waiting for her. Hale was watching her intently, arms crossed over his chest, his stance rigid and unfriendly. Lena felt a spark of irritation, but forced herself to stay calm, reminding herself that there was no reason to assume anything. Perhaps he was simply checking in on the store. However, as she turned to pay, Hale stepped forward, blocking her path. "Captain Walker," he said, his tone cold. "I'd like to see some identification." Lena's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Identification? Officer Hale, I'm sure you know exactly who I am." Hale's face remained unreadable. "I saw you acting suspiciously, handling merchandise in a way that looked questionable. Just following procedure." A flicker of anger sparked in Lena's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm a police captain, Officer Hale. I've been to this store countless times. There's no need for this." Hale's gaze hardened, his eyes narrowing. "All the more reason to set a good example, wouldn't you say?" The tension in the air was thick, and Lena could feel the weight of judgment from Kevin, who stood nervously behind the counter, his gaze darting between her and Hale. Lena held her ground, refusing to let this unfounded accusation rattle her. But she could see the growing satisfaction in Hale's expression, as if her refusal only strengthened his resolve. Finally, with a controlled sigh, Lena pulled out her ID and handed it over, determined not to escalate the situation. Hale examined it slowly, taking his time as he scrutinized every detail. Satisfied, he handed it back with a faint, insincere smile. "Thank you, Captain. Just ensuring protocol is followed." Lena could feel her patience wearing thin, but she managed to calm, of course, before pocketing her ID. She paid Kevin for her items, feeling the weight of Hale's stare as she did, and left the store with a renewed sense of unease. The following day, Lena's discomfort turned to shock when she received a call from the precinct. She was being summoned in for questioning regarding an alleged theft at Willowbrook Market. Kevin Shaw had reportedly filed a complaint, claiming she had taken items without paying. Lena's heart dropped. She knew Kevin, knew he wouldn't accuse her of something so ridiculous without serious coercion. And only one person came to mind as a possible instigator: Hale. Arriving at the precinct, Lena was greeted with a palpable tension. Officers watched her with thinly veiled suspicion as she walked through the station. Chief Thomas Riley, who had been a mentor to her for years, looked visibly distressed as he motioned for her to step into his office. "Lena," he began, his voice carrying a weight of concern and regret. "I don't know what's going on here, but this isn't good. A formal complaint was filed against you, and it needs to be addressed. You understand that we have to follow procedure." Lena's mind raced, piecing together the events of the last few days. She felt a mix of disbelief and anger, but she kept her voice steady. "Chief, I didn't take anything. This is a misunderstanding, or worse, a setup." Riley's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained formal. "I understand, Lena, but until this is cleared up, you'll need to turn over your badge and weapon. You'll be on temporary suspension pending investigation." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her badge, a symbol of her years of dedication to justice and her community, slipped from her hand as she placed it on the desk, its metallic gleam cold and foreign under the harsh office lights. "Is this necessary, Chief?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But Riley's silence spoke volumes. As she walked out of the office, Caleb caught her eye from across the room. His expression was a mix of anger and disbelief, but he gave her a small, supportive nod, mouthing, "We'll get through this." She nodded back, grateful for the one friend she knew she could count on. When she stepped out of the precinct, the gravity of her situation truly hit her. Her identity, her reputation, and her career, all thrown into question over a baseless accusation. And she knew that if she didn't act soon, everything she'd built could be destroyed in a matter of days. Lena walked out of the precinct feeling stripped bare. The weight of her suspension hung over her like a dark cloud, and with each step, she felt herself slipping further from the career she had dedicated her life to. Willowbrook had always been more than just a neighborhood. It was her community, her family. And now, she faced the possibility of losing it all over an accusation she knew was not only false but carefully crafted. When she reached her car, she sat in silence for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as waves of disbelief washed over her. The betrayal felt tangible, like a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding since Hale's accusation. She thought of all the hours she'd spent working to earn the community's trust, the countless cases she'd handled with integrity and respect, and the colleagues she'd called friends, all of it now teetering on the edge of ruin. Pulling herself together, she reached for her phone and dialed her sister, Melanie. Melanie answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Hey, Lena, what's up?" Lena took a steadying breath. "Mel, something's happened, and I don't know where to start." There was a pause on the other end, and then Melanie's tone softened, laced with concern. "Tell me everything. I'm here." As Lena explained the accusation, the suspension, and the humiliation she'd faced, Melanie listened without interrupting. When Lena finished, there was a moment of silence. "I can't believe this, Lena," Melanie finally said, her voice thick with anger. "You've given everything to that department. They know your character. How could they turn on you so quickly?" "I don't know," Lena replied, struggling to keep her composure. It feels like this was planned, and I don't know if I can get out of it alone." "Well, you're not alone," Melanie said firmly. "I know you'll get through this. You've fought harder battles before, and you still have people who believe in you." Lena felt a glimmer of reassurance, bolstered by her sister's words. But as she ended the call and looked back at the precinct looming behind her, she knew that proving her innocence was going to be a long, uphill battle. That evening, Detective Caleb Turner sat in his office, the dim glow of his computer screen illuminating the determined set of his jaw. The accusation against Lena gnawed at him, not only because it was ludicrous, but because he knew Hale's fingerprints were all over it. Caleb's instincts told him there was more to the story, that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a setup. After a quick call to Lena to confirm her suspension, Caleb promised he would look into it, assuring her that she didn't have to face this alone. He could tell Lena was struggling to keep it together, but her gratitude was clear. She trusted him, and he intended to prove that trust was well placed. Caleb opened the precinct's personnel database and started digging into Hale's background. Officer Ryan Hale had a relatively clean record on the surface. His personnel file listed commendations from previous precincts, noting his efficiency in high-stress situations and his strong sense of duty. But Caleb knew that sometimes the worst offenses lay just beneath those pristine records. It didn't take long for him to find something unusual. Each of Hale's last 3 precincts had been short-lived assignments, each less than a year. The records showed a trail of rapid transfers with vague justifications: workforce reallocation, departmental restructuring. Yet, in each precinct, there were whispers, unresolved complaints, and one transfer specifically following a workplace incident with another officer. Digging deeper, Caleb uncovered a string of complaints from minority officers about Hale's intimidating behavior, particularly toward those who held positions of authority. Most complaints were logged as inconclusive or resolved without action, a familiar red flag in cases where the system closed ranks around its own. The deeper he went, the clearer the pattern became. Hale would push boundaries, testing how far he could go before being transferred, often at the expense of colleagues who didn't fit his narrow view of how things should be. In each case, he'd left behind an atmosphere of tension, with complaints quietly swept under the rug. Caleb shook his head, anger building as he sifted through the reports. He'd seen men like Hale before, those who wielded authority not as a responsibility, but as a weapon, seeking control and influence without regard for the people affected. His suspicions had been right. Hale's animosity toward Lena wasn't about justice or the law. It was about dominance, about undermining anyone he perceived as a threat. Taking a deep breath, Caleb closed his laptop and jotted down a list of names. Officers from Hale's previous precincts who might be willing to talk. He knew it was a long shot, but if he could gather testimony about Hale's behavior, he could start building a case that showed Hale's patterns of bias and intimidation. With the list in hand, he headed over to Lena's house to share his findings. She needed to know they had a lead, and Caleb was determined to show her that there was a way forward. Lena was seated at her kitchen table when Caleb arrived, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she'd barely touched. She looked up as he entered, her eyes weary but resolute. Caleb took a seat across from her, placing his notes on the table between them. "I found something," he said, watching as a spark of hope lit her eyes. "It's not concrete yet, but there's a pattern to Hale's transfers. I looked into his records, and it's clear he's been shuffled around. There are multiple complaints from minority officers, each one labeled as inconclusive." Lena's fingers tightened around her mug. "And nobody did anything?" Caleb shook his head. "It's the same story each time. Officially, they're brushed off. But I think there's enough there to start connecting the dots. I'm reaching out to some of his former colleagues, seeing if anyone's willing to talk." Lena nodded, a hint of relief softening her expression. "Thank you, Caleb. I can't tell you how much this means to me. I felt like I was drowning back there." Caleb's voice softened. "You don't have to go through this alone. You've always had my back, Lena. I'm not about to let Hale ruin everything you've built over some baseless accusation." Lena managed a small smile, but her face clouded as she thought back to the events of the past few days. "I just don't understand why he's doing this. It's like he's targeting me, like it's personal. I think it is, Caleb replied. Men like Hale? They don't care about the law. Not really. They care about power. And I think he saw your authority as a threat. Lena exhaled, her shoulders slumping slightly as the weight of Caleb's words settled over her. She'd always prided herself on leading with integrity, on building a reputation rooted in trust and respect. To think that someone could be working so actively to tear that down was both enraging and heartbreaking. So, what's the plan? She asked, her voice steadying. I'll keep digging, Caleb replied. I want to see if I can find someone from Hale's past who'll talk. And if I can get Chief Riley on board, we might be able to take a closer look at the surveillance footage from the store. If it's been tampered with, that could be our ticket to proving Hale's intentions. Lena's eyes narrowed as she thought back to that day at the market, to the way Hale had watched her every move, his expression unreadable, but his intent unmistakable. She'd seen it all in his eyes, the satisfaction of someone who believed he could act with impunity. Whatever it takes, she said quietly, her voice a mix of determination and anger. I'm not letting him get away with this. Caleb gave her a reassuring nod, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. That's the Lena I know. Together, they began planning their next steps, their shared purpose strengthening Lena's resolve. With Caleb by her side, she felt a renewed sense of hope, even in the face of mounting obstacles. Hale's web of deceit was complex, but Lena was no stranger to hard battles, and this was one she was determined to win. Caleb sat at his desk in the precinct, his eyes scanning a list of names he'd compiled from Hale's transfer records. He'd highlighted a few former colleagues who had filed complaints about Hale, hoping they might be willing to share their stories. However, as he began reaching out to them one by one, he quickly realized it wouldn't be that easy. The first few calls were met with hesitation. Officers from Hale's past precincts either dodged his questions, claiming they didn't want to dig up old wounds, or offered vague, carefully worded responses that avoided direct criticism of Hale. Caleb knew that speaking out against a fellow officer, especially in a case as delicate as this, could carry serious repercussions, and it was clear these officers were unwilling to risk their careers. One name stood out, however: Officer Julie Warner, a former colleague of Hale's from his last precinct. Julie had left a detailed complaint that hinted at a pattern of coercion and intimidation from Hale. Caleb managed to get her on the phone after several attempts, and after a few minutes of polite small talk, he gently steered the conversation toward Hale. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she responded, her voice barely above a whisper. Look, Detective Turner, I don't know what you've heard, but Hale, he's not someone you want to cross. I made that mistake, and it cost me my peace of mind. The man is ruthless when he's backed into a corner. Caleb leaned forward, his voice steady but urging. I understand the risks, Officer Warner, but this is important. He set up one of the best officers in our precinct, Captain Lena Walker, on false accusations. I believe he's trying to dismantle her career, just as he did with you and others. Anything you can tell me, off the record even, might help. Another pause, then a soft sigh. I believe you, Detective, but you have to understand, if Hale finds out I'm talking about this, it could ruin my career. I filed the complaint thinking it might make a difference, but they dismissed it like it was nothing. And then I was encouraged to transfer. It was all wrapped up neatly, with a smile and a pat on the back. Anything you tell me will be kept confidential, Caleb assured her. You'd be helping us more than you know. Julie hesitated again, but finally relented, her tone resigned. Fine. Just be careful, all right? Hale doesn't play fair, and he's good at covering his tracks. The last time I saw him target someone, he dismantled their reputation piece by piece, just like he's doing to your captain. He's not above using others to get what he wants, and he knows how to make his actions look justified. Caleb thanked her, scribbling down notes as she recounted Hale's behavior. By the time he hung up, he had a clearer picture of Hale's methods. Using subtle manipulation, creating just enough doubt to make his targets seem unreliable, then moving in with accusations. It was like watching a slow-motion takedown, and now, Lena was in his sights. Feeling the weight of the information he'd gathered, Caleb knew it was time to share his findings with Chief Riley. Though he hadn't been able to gather anything officially incriminating, he hoped Riley's sense of integrity would push him to at least consider the evidence. Caleb stood outside Chief Riley's office, steeling himself. Riley was known for his fair judgment and a strong moral compass. But the chief was also under immense pressure to maintain the department's image. Going up against an officer like Hale, even quietly, was a delicate matter that could have ripple effects throughout the precinct. When Caleb entered, Riley glanced up, nodding for him to take a seat. Riley's office was modest but neat, a testament to his years of steady leadership. On his desk lay a file marked with Lena's name, a constant reminder of the turmoil her case had stirred within the department. "What's on your mind, Turner?" Riley asked, his tone cautious. Caleb took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Chief, I've been looking into Hale's past. There are patterns that I believe are directly connected to what's happening with Captain Walker. His previous assignments ended in transfers after he targeted officers, especially minority officers in positions of authority, with complaints and accusations." Riley's brow furrowed as Caleb continued, outlining his conversation with Julie Warner and the unofficial stories from Hale's previous precincts. Caleb watched Riley's expression shift, the chief's initial neutrality giving way to concern. "I won't lie, Chief," Caleb said, his voice steady. "I believe Hale has a vendetta against Lena. He's using his position and influence to tear down her reputation. And if we let this slide, we're letting him destroy one of the best officers we have." Riley was silent, his fingers steepled as he stared at the file on his desk. "Turner, you're asking me to take a hard look at a fellow officer based on unofficial complaints and personal testimonies. You know the protocols. We need tangible evidence, something beyond stories from other precincts." "I understand, sir," Caleb replied, leaning forward. "But if we look into the surveillance footage from Willowbrook Market, there may be evidence of tampering. If we can prove the footage was altered, it would lend weight to what I've found. This isn't just about Lena. It's about protecting the integrity of our department." Riley's face was tense, his gaze fixed on Caleb with an unreadable expression. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Fine. I'll authorize a preliminary review of the surveillance footage, but that's as far as we go without concrete proof. I need you to understand, Turner, this has to stay quiet. If Hale gets wind of this—" "I understand, Chief," Caleb replied, feeling a sense of relief. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Riley's gaze softened, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face. "Turner, I respect your loyalty to Captain Walker. And for what it's worth, I want to believe she's innocent. But you're both walking a thin line here. Be careful." Caleb left Riley's office feeling a mix of determination and trepidation. The chief's agreement to review the footage was a small victory, but he knew they still had a long way to go. As he made his way out of the precinct, he pulled out his phone, texting Lena to let her know they had the chief's tentative support. Meanwhile, Lena's isolation continued to deepen. The once welcoming precinct now felt like a minefield, where even the simplest interactions seemed loaded with suspicion. She walked down the hall, catching the sideways glances and whispered conversations that trailed behind her. The rumors had taken on a life of their own, fueled by Hale's subtle insinuations and his strategic absences, which seemed to create a narrative of guilt by association. One afternoon, Lena overheard a conversation in the break room as she was passing by. Two junior officers, oblivious to her presence, spoke in hushed tones. "I mean, it's crazy to think about," one said, his voice low. "Captain Walker, of all people. I didn't want to believe it, but they don't just suspend you for nothing, right?" The other officer nodded, glancing around as though worried they might be overheard. "Yeah, but I heard Officer Hale was the one who reported her. He's just doing his job, you know, trying to clean up the department." Lena felt a flash of anger and hurt, but she forced herself to keep walking, her face a mask of composure. Once she was safely in the stairwell, she paused, leaning against the cool concrete wall as the weight of their words sank in. It wasn't just about her reputation. Hale was systematically chipping away at the respect and trust she'd worked so hard to build within the department. The thought was enough to rekindle her determination. She would prove her innocence, and she would do it with the integrity and strength she'd always brought to her work. No matter how much Hale tried to break her down, she wouldn't let him win. Later that evening, Caleb met Lena at a quiet cafe away from the precinct. They chose a corner booth, the soft murmur of other patrons providing a welcome sense of anonymity. Caleb updated her on his conversation with Chief Riley, his face a mixture of hope and caution. He's agreed to review the footage, Lena, Caleb said, keeping his voice low. It's not much, but it's a start. If we can prove that the video was tampered with, it'll give us something to stand on. Lena felt a glimmer of relief, her first in days. Thank you, Caleb. I know this is a risk, and I can't tell you how much it means to me that you're standing by my side. Caleb shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You've been there for me more times than I can count, Lena. I'd be a fool to let you go through this alone. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. Finally, Lena looked up, her eyes meeting Caleb's with renewed resolve. Whatever it takes, she said quietly. I'm not backing down. Hale's gone too far this time. Caleb nodded, his expression mirroring her determination. Then let's keep pushing. One step at a time. They left the cafe that night with a renewed sense of purpose, each knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but committed to seeing it through. Hale had underestimated Lena's strength, and with Caleb by her side, she was more determined than ever to prove her innocence and reclaim her place in the department. The next morning, Caleb arrived early at the precinct, feeling the familiar rush of anticipation and anxiety. Chief Riley had approved the preliminary review of the Willowbrook market surveillance footage, and Caleb intended to examine every frame closely, hoping to find signs of tampering that could prove Lena's innocence. He entered the evidence room, where Riley was already waiting with a somber expression. The chief gestured to a small monitor displaying a pause frame from the footage. Here's the file we have on record, Riley said, crossing his arms. Make sure to look for anything out of place. If we're going to move forward with this, we need more than suspicions. Caleb nodded, his face determined. Understood, Chief. He began playing the footage, watching closely as Lena entered the store, walked down the aisles, and eventually approached the counter. The scene played out as he remembered her describing it, but something felt off. The angles seemed disjointed, as if the camera cuts were more abrupt than usual. After watching the video in its entirety, Caleb rewound to a specific section and paused. Here, Chief, he said, pointing at the timestamp. This part seems edited. The timestamps don't flow smoothly. There's a slight jump right as she's leaving the aisle and heading toward the counter. Riley leaned in, squinting at the screen. You're right. I can't believe we didn't catch that earlier. It looks seamless unless you're looking for it. This could suggest tampering. Encouraged, Caleb fast-forwarded to another segment, analyzing Lena's movements frame by frame. The missing moments, those small gaps, seemed strategically placed to create an impression of suspicious behavior. In the footage, Lena's movements looked jerky, giving a misleading impression of her behavior. This footage was definitely altered, Caleb concluded, a grim satisfaction in his voice. Someone wanted her to look guilty. They cut out specific frames to make her actions appear furtive. Chief Riley's expression hardened. If this is true, it's far more than a simple setup. It's a calculated attempt to destroy her career. But without knowing who accessed the footage, we're still dealing with circumstantial evidence. Then we dig deeper, Caleb replied firmly. We get records of everyone who accessed the footage in the days following her arrest. Hale may be cunning, but if he left any kind of digital footprint, we'll find it. Riley nodded, though his gaze was distant, as if considering the weight of their discovery. I'll file a request for access logs. But Caleb, be careful. Hale's methods may be subtle, but if he suspects we're onto him, he won't hesitate to protect himself. Caleb agreed, aware of the dangers that came with confronting someone like Hale. But he knew the risks were worth it. Lena's reputation, and possibly her career, depended on the truth coming to light. Later that afternoon, word began to spread through the precinct that Caleb and Chief Riley were re-examining the evidence in Lena's case. As Caleb walked the hallways, he sensed a shift in the air. Conversations grew quieter as he approached, and more than one officer shot him a wary look, as if wondering why he was going against the current. Despite the tense atmosphere, Caleb noticed a few familiar faces offering nods of encouragement. One of them was Officer Sam Hayes, a younger officer who had been deeply influenced by Lena's leadership. He approached Caleb in the break room, his expression filled with uncertainty and curiosity. "Detective Turner," Sam began hesitantly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "I heard you're looking into Captain Walker's case. Is it true that there might be something wrong with the footage?" Caleb studied him for a moment, gauging the sincerity in his voice. Sam had always been loyal to Lena, looking up to her as a mentor. Caleb knew that if he could count on anyone for support, it would be Sam. "Yes, it's true," Caleb replied quietly. "The footage shows signs of tampering. Someone's gone to great lengths to make her look guilty." Sam's eyes widened, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "That's unbelievable. I knew something was off. I mean, I couldn't believe she'd do something like that. Not after everything she's done for us." Caleb nodded, feeling a sense of relief. "Lena's one of the best officers we've got, but someone's working against her. I don't know how far Hale's influence reaches, but if you're willing to stand with us, we could use the support." Sam didn't hesitate. "I'm with you. Just tell me what you need." The two exchanged a look of mutual understanding, and Caleb felt a renewed sense of purpose. Lena wasn't completely alone. There were people within the precinct who still believed in her, officers who weren't swayed by Hale's quiet campaign of doubt. Later, Caleb made his way to Lena's house, eager to share the progress they'd made. She greeted him with a mixture of hope and exhaustion, her face lighting up slightly at the sight of her friend. "Please tell me you have good news," Lena said as they sat down at her kitchen table, the familiar warmth of her home a stark contrast to the coldness of the precinct. Caleb nodded, pulling out a notepad with his findings. "We found evidence of tampering in the footage. The timestamps don't align, and certain frames are missing. Chief Riley's filed a request for access logs to see who might have altered it." Lena's shoulders sagged with relief, a small, hopeful smile tugging at her lips. "Finally, proof. I knew something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed makes a world of difference." Caleb reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're not alone in this, Lena. Sam Hayes is with us too. He came to me today, asking how he could help. The tide is starting to turn." The warmth in Lena's eyes was mixed with determination. "I'll never be able to thank you enough, Caleb. I was beginning to feel like everyone had already made up their minds about me." "Some have," Caleb admitted, his tone grim. "But there are those who still believe in you. We just have to keep pushing, one step at a time." They spent the rest of the evening going over strategies, discussing possible allies, and examining every detail of the case. For the first time since her suspension, Lena felt the fog of hopelessness lifting. She knew the battle wasn't over, but Caleb's presence, and the small victories they'd achieved, gave her the strength to face whatever lay ahead. As Caleb left that evening, Lena stood at the door, watching him disappear down the street. The weight on her shoulders felt lighter, the darkness less overwhelming. She was ready to fight, not only to clear her name, but to expose the corruption that threatened the very integrity of her department. The following day, Caleb received a message from Chief Riley confirming that the access logs had been retrieved. He felt a surge of excitement as he reviewed the email, which contained the names and timestamps of every officer who had accessed the Willowbrook market surveillance footage. If Hale had tampered with it, there might finally be something concrete to connect him to the crime. In Riley's office, Caleb carefully scrolled through the access log, noting the usual names: IT personnel, evidence clerks, and administrative staff who would have had legitimate reasons to handle the footage. But one entry caught his eye, a login tied to an external device at an odd hour, just a few hours after the footage was initially uploaded to the precinct server. "This could be it," Caleb said, looking up at Riley. Whoever accessed this file from an outside device went through quite a few steps to cover their tracks. "It looks like they use an encrypted connection to make the access, but the timestamp is unusual." Riley nodded, his face set in a grim line. "I don't want to speculate, but if Hale is as thorough as you say, it wouldn't surprise me if he found a way to manipulate the footage without leaving an obvious trail. Keep going, Turner. If there's a connection, I want it locked down before we bring him in." Caleb continued to examine the logs, cross-referencing the data with recent access patterns. A pattern began to emerge. Each access to the footage by the unidentified device seemed timed to coincide with Lena's investigation updates or procedural shifts. It was as though someone were monitoring the case in real time, adjusting the evidence as needed. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. The realization dawned on him that Hale had likely been watching them from the start, manipulating the evidence whenever their investigation drew too close to the truth. "Chief," Caleb said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "If we're going to confront Hale, it has to be soon. I'm almost certain he'll try to cover his tracks again if he suspects we're onto him." Riley nodded, his eyes hardening with determination. "Then we need to act fast. I'll issue a formal request to examine Hale's work device and pull any records that could tie him to this. I trust you'll handle this quietly?" Caleb nodded. "You have my word, Chief. I won't let you down." As Caleb prepared for the next steps in his investigation, the precinct continued to simmer with tension. Whispers of a brewing conflict between Caleb and Hale circulated through the department, and officers were beginning to take sides. Many still viewed Lena with suspicion, but there were a few who had grown uncomfortable with the way Hale seemed to assert control over the narrative. One afternoon, Caleb found himself cornered in the hallway by Officer Janine Miller, a veteran officer who had always respected Lena's work. Janine was in her early 50s, a no-nonsense woman with a steely gaze that had weathered years of tough cases. "Turner," she said, her voice low but direct. "I've been hearing things about Captain Walker, and none of it sits right with me. You really believe she's innocent?" Caleb met her gaze, unwavering. "I do. There's more going on here than what people see. Hale's been manipulating the situation, and we're getting close to proving it." Janine's expression softened slightly, a hint of relief breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. "Lena's one of the best we've got. If there's anything I can do, let me know. I'm tired of watching good people get dragged down by politics." Caleb nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Janine. I may take you up on that sooner than you think." Over the next few days, he reached out quietly to other officers he trusted, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. With Janine's support, more officers began to question the evidence against Lena, recognizing the signs of manipulation that Caleb and Riley were working to expose. Later that evening, Caleb met with Lena at a secluded cafe, where they often held their private discussions. She looked more rested than she had in days, and her expression showed a glimmer of hope as he approached. "You've found something, haven't you?" Lena asked, her voice laced with a mixture of anticipation and caution. Caleb nodded, leaning in as he lowered his voice. "The access logs reveal that someone used an external device to alter the footage, and the timings match key moments in your case. Chief Riley has agreed to let me examine Hale's work device. If we can link him to the tampering, it might be enough to expose the truth." Lena's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes held a guarded look. "Caleb, do you really think it'll be that simple? Hale's been in control from the start. He's covered every track, manipulated every detail." Caleb reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I know it feels that way, but he's not invincible. He's made mistakes, and we're uncovering them one by one. Just keep holding on. We're close." She managed a small smile, but there was a shadow in her gaze, a hint of the toll this ordeal had taken on her. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything. I wouldn't be able to face this without you." Caleb's voice softened. "You don't have to thank me, Lena. We're in this together." They shared a moment of silent resolve, each drawing strength from the other's determination. They knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt like victory was within reach. 2 days after Chief Riley approved Caleb's request, Caleb received Hale's work laptop under the guise of a routine departmental audit. His heart raced as he took the laptop to a quiet room, knowing that what he might find could either vindicate Lena or put his own career at risk. He powered it on, quickly navigating through the device's files. Initially, he saw nothing unusual, just the standard police reports, case files, and records Hale had worked on recently. Caleb knew that if Hale were careful, he'd hide any incriminating files in a way that wouldn't be easily noticeable. Caleb pulled up the external device logs, checking for any unusual activity. As he scrolled through the entries, he noticed something peculiar. A series of external hard drives had been connected over the past month, each accessed during late-night hours when the precinct was empty. He jotted down the timestamps, cross-referencing them with the suspicious logins on the surveillance footage from Willowbrook Market. The times matched perfectly. It was a breakthrough, but Caleb needed something more concrete. He delved further into Hale's system, navigating through hidden folders and encrypted files, each layer of security making him more certain that Hale had gone to great lengths to protect whatever he was hiding. After an hour of careful searching, Caleb finally uncovered a folder tucked away in an obscure directory labeled with a series of random characters. Inside the folder was a cache of video editing software, a strange find on a police officer's laptop. Among the files was a single unmarked video clip with a timestamp matching the night of Lena's supposed theft. Caleb played the video, watching as the original footage from Willowbrook Market appeared on the screen. As the video ran, he saw Lena moving through the aisles in her typical routine, her movements calm and natural, clearly paying for her items before leaving. But in a few clicks, the clip changed, and Caleb saw the edited version, the one that depicted Lena in a suspicious light. His hands shook slightly as he saved copies of both the unedited and altered footage onto a secure flash drive. This was it, the evidence they needed to prove Hale had doctored the surveillance to frame Lena. He immediately closed the files, double-checking to ensure everything was secured, and powered down the laptop. Caleb sat back, exhaling as the gravity of his discovery settled over him. This wasn't just about clearing Lena's name. It was about exposing a calculated abuse of power by an officer who'd gone unchecked for far too long. He gathered his notes, pocketed the flash drive, and headed to Chief Riley's office, eager to share the breakthrough. Chief Riley's office was quiet when Caleb entered, the chief glancing up with a mix of expectation and wariness. "Chief, I think we have what we need," Caleb said, setting the flash drive on the desk. "I found unedited footage of the incident." Hale's laptop had a folder with video editing software and timestamps showing exactly when he altered the footage. This should be enough to clear Lena's name. Riley's eyes widened as he plugged in the flash drive, watching both versions of the footage side by side. He replayed the sequence several times, his face growing increasingly grim as he absorbed the evidence. Finally, he looked up at Caleb, his expression filled with a mix of anger and regret. "This is damning," he muttered. Hale not only manipulated the evidence, but he used it to attempt to dismantle the career of one of our best officers. This goes beyond misconduct. This is criminal. Caleb nodded, his voice steady. "So, what's our next move, Chief?" Riley leaned back, exhaling deeply as he weighed his options. "We'll need to confront Hale, but we need to be strategic. This can't turn into a spectacle. If he senses we're about to take him down, he may try to destroy whatever else he's hiding." "Understood," Caleb replied, sensing the weight of what lay ahead. "If we confront him, it'll have to be direct, with no chance for him to wiggle out of it." Riley nodded. "We'll do this in private, with the evidence prepared and ready. If he refuses to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to involve internal affairs. Let's set up a meeting tomorrow morning. I'll handle the rest." As Caleb left Riley's office, he felt a surge of anticipation, a sense that justice was finally within reach. But he also knew that Hale wouldn't go down easily. The storm that had been brewing for weeks was about to break, and the fallout would be felt across the entire precinct. Later that evening, as Caleb made his way back to his office, he encountered Hale in the hallway. The officer's gaze was sharp, his posture tense, as if he sensed that the walls were closing in. Hale's voice carried a thinly veiled hostility as he addressed Caleb. "Heard you've been busy, Turner," Hale said, his tone mocking. "Sticking your nose in places it doesn't belong, I'd imagine." Caleb met his gaze evenly. "I'm just doing my job, Hale." "Same as you." Hale's eyes narrowed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Careful, detective. Digging around in other people's business can get you into trouble." Caleb felt a flicker of anger, but kept his tone calm. "Is that a threat?" Hale's smirk widened. "Just a friendly piece of advice. We wouldn't want things to get complicated." The tension between them was palpable, and for a moment, Caleb considered calling him out right there. But he knew it wasn't the right time. He needed the official backing of Chief Riley, the full weight of the evidence they'd gathered. So he merely nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Thanks for the advice, Hale. I'll keep it in mind." Hale walked away, his shoulders set with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. But Caleb sensed a flicker of something beneath the bravado, an awareness that his control over the situation was slipping. And tomorrow, that control would shatter completely. That night, Caleb met with Lena at her home, updating her on the plan to confront Hale in the morning. She listened intently, her expression a mix of relief and tension, her hands gripping her coffee mug as he laid out the details. "So this is it?" she asked quietly. "This is the moment we've been fighting for?" Caleb nodded. "We have the evidence, Lena. Hale's tampered footage, the access logs, everything. Tomorrow, we'll confront him, and with any luck, Chief Riley will have the authority to remove him from his position." Lena exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like weeks. "I can't believe it's finally happening. I spent so long wondering if I'd ever be able to clear my name, and now, it's within reach." Caleb gave her a reassuring smile. "You've fought this with dignity, Lena, and no matter how tomorrow goes, you've shown everyone what true integrity looks like." They spent the rest of the evening in quiet conversation, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to hope, not just for vindication, but for a return to the career and community she loved. As she saw Caleb to the door, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." Caleb smiled, his gaze filled with warmth and pride. "You don't have to thank me, Lena. Tomorrow, the truth will come out, and we'll face it together." The next morning dawned crisp and clear, but the atmosphere inside the precinct was tense. Caleb arrived early, his mind racing with anticipation. He knew that what would happen today would define not only Lena's career, but also the integrity of their department. He moved through the hallways, noticing the sidelong glances from his fellow officers and the hushed conversations that quieted as he passed. Rumors had already spread that something significant was about to go down. Chief Riley had arranged the meeting in a private conference room away from the main offices, minimizing the risk of interruptions. The room was small, with a simple table and chairs and a large screen where Caleb's presentation of evidence was queued up and ready. Caleb took a seat, his hands steady, his gaze focused as he awaited Riley's arrival. Shortly after, Chief Riley entered, his face drawn with resolve. He gave Caleb a brief nod before checking his watch and glancing toward the door. Then came the sound of footsteps. Hale entered the room, his expression composed but his posture stiff. He looked between Riley and Caleb, a hint of defiance in his eyes. "Morning, Chief." "Detective Turner," Hale greeted them, his tone casual but laced with wariness. "So, what's this about?" Riley motioned for Hale to take a seat. "Thank you for joining us, Officer Hale. I'll get straight to the point. We've been conducting an internal review regarding recent accusations made against Captain Lena Walker. After examining the evidence, it appears there are significant discrepancies in the surveillance footage from Willowbrook Market. Discrepancies that point to deliberate tampering." Hale's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure, his eyes flashing with an unreadable expression. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Chief. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with that footage, you're sorely mistaken." "We're not suggesting anything," Caleb replied, his tone firm. "We're presenting facts. The access logs for the footage show entries from an external device that matches the timestamps of edits made to the file. We also found traces of video editing software on your department-issued laptop, and the footage itself was altered in a way that made Captain Walker's actions appear suspicious." Hale's gaze shifted between Caleb and Riley, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You're grasping at straws. Anyone could have accessed that footage. There's no way to prove I was the one behind any alleged tampering." Chief Riley leaned forward, his eyes cold. "The evidence points to you, Hale, and we both know that tampering with evidence is not only a violation of department policy, it's a criminal offense. Now, we're giving you a chance to explain yourself. I'd suggest you take it." Hale's expression hardened, the confident facade slipping as he realized the gravity of the situation. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze narrowing on Caleb. "This is a setup. You're trying to ruin my career because I called out a fellow officer who wasn't following protocol. Captain Walker broke the rules, and you're covering for her." Caleb's hands clenched under the table, but he kept his voice calm. We're here because the truth matters, Hale. This has nothing to do with protecting anyone. It's about integrity. Captain Walker has served this precinct with dedication and honor, and you know it. You, on the other hand, have gone out of your way to undermine her. Hale scoffed, his tone dripping with disdain. And what makes you so sure of that? You don't know the first thing about me, Turner. Maybe you should take a hard look at your own motives before you start making accusations. Riley's gaze never wavered. Enough, Hale. We've reviewed the evidence thoroughly. You're facing serious consequences, and your attempts to deflect won't change that. You can either cooperate and make this process smoother, or we'll escalate this to internal affairs, where it'll become a formal investigation. For a moment, Hale looked as if he might argue, but something in his expression shifted. His confidence faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear that he couldn't fully conceal. He forced a cold smile, crossing his arms over his chest. You think you can just ruin me with this nonsense? Go ahead. I'm not admitting to anything, he said, his voice low but laced with venom. But don't think this is over. Riley gave him a hard look. Then we have no choice. Officer Hale, you're officially relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the investigation. You'll be escorted to collect your belongings and leave the premises. Hale's face twisted with anger, but he remained silent, his gaze burning with resentment as he rose from his chair. Caleb watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. Hale might be off the force for now, but Caleb knew that the man wouldn't back down easily. Once Hale was gone, Riley turned to Caleb, a grim but relieved expression on his face. You handled that well, Turner. It's not easy standing up to someone like Hale, but you did the right thing. Caleb nodded, exhaling as the tension eased. Thank you, Chief. I just want to see justice served. Lena deserves that, at the very least. Riley's gaze softened slightly. And she'll get it. With Hale suspended, we can finally start rebuilding trust within this precinct. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them feeling the weight of what had just transpired. But as Caleb left the room, a renewed sense of purpose filled him. They had won a critical battle, but the fight wasn't over yet. There would be fallout, challenges, and likely more obstacles as Hale's case moved forward. But Caleb knew that he and Lena would face them together, and that knowledge gave him the strength to keep going. Word spread quickly through the precinct about Hale's suspension, and the atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Officers who had once looked at Lena with suspicion now seemed to avoid eye contact, their expressions tinged with guilt. Conversations around the precinct grew cautious, and a strange silence settled over the hallways. Lena returned to the precinct that afternoon, her head held high despite the lingering tension. She could feel the weight of curious glances, the quiet murmurs as she passed by. But this time, she didn't feel isolated. Caleb walked beside her, a steady presence that reminded her of the support she had, of the battle they had fought and won together. As she entered the main office, Officer Sam Hayes approached her with a tentative smile. Captain Walker, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. It's clear now that you were set up, and I'm ashamed I doubted you. Lena's expression softened, and she offered him a nod. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. It's been a difficult time, but I understand how things looked. What matters now is moving forward. Other officers soon approached her, some offering quiet apologies, others expressing relief that the truth had come out. The support was gradual, but each interaction felt like a step toward rebuilding the trust and respect she'd lost. Later that day, Chief Riley called Lena into his office, his demeanor one of reserved pride. Captain Walker, I want to personally apologize for the way this situation was handled. You should never have been subjected to such an ordeal. Lena smiled, her voice steady. Thank you, Chief. I understand that protocol had to be followed, and I'm grateful for the support I received when the truth came to light. This department is my family, and I want to help restore that trust. Riley nodded, a hint of admiration in his gaze. Your resilience is commendable, Lena. You've shown more integrity than many would have in your situation. Now let's get back to doing what we do best, serving this community with honor. Lena felt a sense of relief wash over her as she left Riley's office, a renewed resolve filling her. The path to fully clearing her name wasn't over, and Hale's suspension was just the beginning of a long process to bring justice to light. But she was ready to face whatever came next. That evening, Caleb joined Lena at her house, the two of them sitting on her porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. The weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift, leaving a sense of quiet satisfaction in its place. "Feels surreal, doesn't it?" Lena murmured, gazing out at the darkening sky. "After everything, I wasn't sure this moment would ever come." Caleb nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "It was a long fight, but you never gave up. And that's why you're sitting here, free from all of Hale's lies." Lena sighed, a faint smile crossing her face. "I couldn't have done it without you, Caleb. You stood by me, even when the whole precinct turned their backs. I'll never forget that." Caleb looked over at her, his expression warm. "Your family, Lena, and family doesn't quit on each other. Besides, the precinct is a better place because of you." They sat in companionable silence, the stars beginning to peek out in the night sky. Lena felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she'd fought for what mattered most: her integrity, her community, and her family within the precinct. As they sat together, Lena knew that the battle wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, but she was no longer alone. With Caleb by her side and the support of her precinct beginning to return, she was ready to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. And as the night settled around them, Lena felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would not only clear her name, but restore the honor of the badge she wore. This was just the beginning of her journey, and she was prepared for whatever lay ahead. The days following Hale's suspension were filled with both relief and uncertainty for Lena. Returning to work brought a sense of normalcy, but the atmosphere within the precinct had irrevocably changed. Colleagues who had once looked up to her now seemed hesitant, caught between their respect for her and the lingering doubts Hale's manipulations had planted. In the break room, she encountered Janine Miller, the seasoned officer who had quietly supported her during the investigation. Janine approached her with a warm smile, and Lena felt a rush of gratitude for the solidarity she had shown. "Captain Walker," Janine said, her tone respectful, "I just wanted you to know that, no matter what's happened, there are still those of us who have your back. It's been a difficult time for all of us, but I'm glad to see you back." "Thank you, Janine." Lena returned the smile, her voice filled with gratitude. "I know things have been tense. I appreciate everyone who stood by me. It means more than I can say." Janine nodded, and the two exchanged a knowing look. Lena felt a renewed sense of purpose, her resolve strengthened by those who believed in her. Rebuilding trust was a gradual process, but she was committed to proving herself to her team, her community, and to herself. That weekend, Lena attended a community outreach event organized by her precinct. It was one of the events she'd helped set up before her suspension, and she was determined to make it a success. She greeted familiar faces as she moved through the crowd, her interactions with Willowbrook residents bringing her a sense of comfort and normalcy. Kevin Shaw, the owner of Willowbrook Market, approached her with an apologetic smile. His shoulders were tense, and his face carried the weight of guilt and regret. "Captain Walker," he began, his voice low, "I don't know how to apologize for what happened. Officer Hale came to me that day, and well, he made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, my store would be facing extra scrutiny. I was scared, but that's no excuse." Lena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Kevin, I understand. Hale manipulated a lot of people, not just you. What matters is that the truth came out." Kevin's face softened with relief, and he nodded. "Thank you, Captain. I'll make sure Willowbrook knows the kind of person you really are." As she moved through the crowd, the warm words and supportive gestures from her community reminded her that her work had always been about more than just enforcing the law. It was about building trust and understanding, qualities that had been tested but not broken. For the first time in weeks, Lena felt like she was home. Several weeks passed, and Lena settled back into her role with a renewed sense of commitment. The investigation into Hale's misconduct was underway, and the precinct was slowly healing from the fracture his actions had caused. Lena's colleagues began to show her more respect, the initial discomfort easing as they came to see her resilience and dedication firsthand. One morning, Caleb entered her office, closing the door behind him with a grave expression. "Lena, there's something you need to know." Hale's attorney filed a formal appeal on his suspension. They're pushing back hard, claiming that the evidence against him was insufficient. Lena's face tensed, though she had expected some resistance. "So, he's trying to fight it. I should have known he wouldn't go down without a fight." Caleb nodded, his voice steady but concerned. "He's using every possible avenue to dispute the investigation, questioning the methods we used to collect the evidence and claiming it was a personal vendetta on our part." Lena took a deep breath, the weight of the news settling over her. The thought of Hale re-entering the precinct, even temporarily, filled her with unease. But she knew they couldn't afford to let him undermine their hard-won victory. "What are our options?" she asked, her voice calm but resolute. Caleb leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Chief Riley is standing by our findings, but Hale's appeal is serious. If he manages to find a way back, he could use the opportunity to twist the narrative in his favor. We need to ensure the integrity of our investigation holds up." Lena met his gaze, feeling the familiar resolve settle in her chest. "Then we make sure our evidence is ironclad. If he wants a fight, we'll give him one." In the days that followed, Lena and Caleb worked closely with Chief Riley to prepare for Hale's appeal. They reviewed every piece of evidence, ensuring that the chain of custody was clear and that each point was supported by verifiable data. Their attention to detail left little room for dispute, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that Hale's influence still lingered. As word of Hale's appeal spread, Lena noticed that more officers began to show quiet support. Sam Hayes, Janine Miller, and others who had once kept their distance now openly offered their assistance, helping Lena and Caleb with casework, ensuring their processes were flawless, and spreading a message of solidarity through the precinct. One afternoon, Janine stopped by Lena's office with a cup of coffee and a small smile. "We're with you, Captain. Hale may be pushing back, but he doesn't stand a chance against all of us. We'll make sure of that." Lena felt a surge of gratitude, her spirits lifted by the support. "Thank you, Janine. It means a lot to have you and the team behind me. We're stronger together, and we're going to see this through." As the appeal hearing approached, Lena's confidence grew, bolstered by the unwavering loyalty of her team and the community's support. Hale's attempts to undermine her were a testament to his desperation, and she knew that their unity was the key to overcoming his influence. The day of the appeal hearing arrived, and Lena, Caleb, and Chief Riley stood together as they presented their case before a review board. Hale, flanked by his attorney, maintained a stony silence, his eyes fixed on Lena with a look of cold determination. The review board examined each piece of evidence, watching the unedited surveillance footage, reviewing the access logs, and listening to the testimonies of officers who had witnessed Hale's manipulative tactics. Caleb spoke with confidence, laying out the case methodically, his voice calm and clear. When it was Lena's turn to testify, she spoke with conviction, recounting her experience, the steps she had taken to uphold her duty, and the challenges Hale's actions had placed on her career and reputation. Her words resonated deeply with the board, the truth of her commitment shining through. After a tense deliberation, the board announced its decision. Hale's suspension would be upheld, and an official investigation would proceed, ensuring he faced the full consequences of his actions. Relief washed over Lena as the decision was read, and she exchanged a quiet nod with Caleb, knowing they had won a critical battle. Hale's attorney looked deflated, and Hale himself sat motionless, his face etched with a simmering resentment that told Lena their fight was not truly over. But for now, she had reclaimed her position, her integrity intact. That evening, Lena returned to her precinct, welcomed back with genuine smiles and words of support from her colleagues. The weight of the past few months felt lighter as she realized that the precinct had become stronger, more united in the wake of Hale's actions. Later, Caleb joined her in her office, where they shared a quiet toast to their victory. They sat together in companionable silence, both reflecting on the journey they had taken and the strength they had found in each other. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Caleb said, a faint smile on his face. "To know that justice can still prevail." Lena nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. "Yes, it does. We've shown that standing up for the truth isn't just possible, it's necessary." They clinked their glasses, each silently acknowledging the battles they had fought and the bond that had carried them through. They knew there would be challenges ahead, that Hale's influence might linger, but for now, they savored their victory and the promise of a new beginning. In the days following the appeal hearing, Lena felt a new sense of calm settling over her life. The precinct had weathered a storm, and although some officers were still coming to terms with Hale's actions, the mood was one of relief. The department was ready to move forward, and Lena felt grateful for the support she'd received from her colleagues, her community, and especially Caleb. As Lena walked through the precinct, the usual buzz of activity seemed lighter, less burdened by tension. She exchanged nods and smiles with her colleagues, many of whom expressed renewed confidence in her leadership. Officer Sam Hayes, one of her more vocal supporters, stopped by her office with a shy smile. "Captain Walker," he began, a note of pride in his voice, "it's good to see you back. I think I speak for a lot of us when I say we're proud to have you leading us." "Thank you, Sam." Lena's voice was warm, her gratitude clear. "It's been a challenging journey, but I'm grateful to everyone who supported me along the way. I couldn't have done it without each of you standing by me." Sam nodded, and for a moment, they shared a quiet understanding. Lena knew her work was far from over, but seeing the loyalty and respect in her team's eyes reminded her that they were united in purpose. Over the next few weeks, Lena worked tirelessly to rebuild trust both within the precinct and with the community. She took extra time to visit Willowbrook, speaking with residents, listening to their concerns, and organizing a series of public meetings to address any lingering doubts about the department's commitment to fairness and justice. At one such meeting, an elderly resident named Mrs. Elkins raised her hand, her voice wavering but earnest. "Captain Walker, we've seen a lot of officers come and go, but you've always been one of us. We know you're here for us, and we're grateful." Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest, and she responded with a sincere smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Elkins. This community means the world to me. I'll continue to work to earn your trust every day." The applause that followed reaffirmed her sense of purpose, and as she looked out over the familiar faces, she knew her fight for truth had strengthened her bond with the community. Willowbrook stood behind her, just as she had always stood behind them. As life at the precinct resumed its usual rhythm, Lena and Caleb found time to reflect on everything they had faced together. One evening, Caleb invited Lena to a small celebration at his apartment, a quiet gathering to mark the end of an arduous journey. They sat on the balcony, the city lights casting a soft glow around them as they shared stories and laughter. The burden of the past months seemed to dissolve in the warm evening air, leaving only the comfort of friendship and shared triumph. "You know," Caleb said, leaning back with a thoughtful smile, "I never doubted for a second that you'd make it through. You're one of the strongest people I know." Lena chuckled, shaking her head. "You might be the only one who didn't doubt. There were times I thought I'd lost everything, but knowing you were in my corner, it made all the difference." Caleb raised his glass, his gaze warm. "To integrity, and to those who never give up on the truth." They clinked glasses, and Lena felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She was ready to move forward, not just as a captain, but as someone who had weathered hardship and emerged stronger. Back at the precinct, Lena continued her mission to instill a culture of respect, transparency, and accountability. She implemented new initiatives to promote open communication between officers and community members, encouraging her team to engage with Willowbrook on a personal level. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and slowly, the department's reputation began to heal. One afternoon, Chief Riley called Lena into his office. He looked at her with an expression of pride and respect that made her heart swell. "Captain Walker, I want you to know that your resilience through all of this hasn't gone unnoticed," Riley said, his voice sincere. "You've proven not only your dedication to this precinct, but also your commitment to justice. I'm proud to have you on my team." "Thank you, Chief." Lena's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "This department, this community, they mean everything to me. I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue serving." Riley nodded, a satisfied smile crossing his face. You've set a new standard for leadership here, Lena. Keep up the good work. With a renewed sense of purpose, Lena returned to her office, feeling the weight of the past few months finally lift. She had fought for her name, her career, and her community, and she had emerged victorious. She knew there would always be challenges, but now she had the strength, the support, and the experience to face whatever came her way. Several months later, Lena stood at a community event organized to honor the officers who had gone above and beyond in service to Willowbrook. As she looked out over the crowd, she saw familiar faces: Caleb, Sam, Janine, Kevin from Willowbrook Market, and countless other residents who had stood by her. Taking the stage, Lena addressed the audience, her voice steady and filled with gratitude. This precinct, this community, they've shown me the true meaning of resilience. We are more than just a department. We're a family. Together, we've faced challenges, and together, we've overcome them. I promise to continue serving with the same dedication and integrity that you've shown me every single day. The crowd erupted in applause, and Lena felt a swell of pride as she looked out over the people who had become her family. She had fought for her name, reclaimed her role, and reinforced her commitment to justice. And as she stepped down from the stage, surrounded by friends and colleagues, she knew that this was just the beginning. She had come full circle, standing tall with the unwavering support of her community. She was ready to lead, not just as an officer, but as a symbol of strength and unity. As Lena steps forward into a future filled with purpose and unity, we're reminded that standing up for the truth, even in the face of adversity, can lead to incredible resilience and strength. If you enjoyed following Lena's journey, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't miss out on more powerful stories of justice, courage, and perseverance. And let us know in the comments, what would you do in Lena's situation? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next story.